Welcome to CSIS. My name is Sarah Ladislaw. I am Senior Vice President and Director of the Energy and National Security Program. We are very pleased to have all of you joining us today for our conversation with members of the University Climate Change Coalition. I'm going to get to what that is in just a moment, but one of the things that many of you know is we're running a series here called Climate Change in the National and Corporate Interest. It's a series of events where we've hosted ministers and CEOs of companies to talk about the ways in which they're dealing with climate change, not just the actions, but specifically why they feel like dealing with climate change is core to their national or corporate interest. And we are really, really pleased to have with us today a group that is focusing on those similar themes, but from a research university perspective. In the spring, UC3 was launched by 13 research university systems in the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And they were specifically focusing on mobilizing their resources and expertise to inform and facilitate climate solutions in partnership with business and local communities. So not only looking at what they do on the research side of the house, but also looking to take that expertise and resources and work with businesses in their community, work with local communities on their climate plans, and advance agendas in that way. And so today I'm really pleased to have with us some of the leadership of that organization. They don't really need much introduction, but I'm going to introduce them nonetheless. First, to my immediate left is the Honorable Janet Napolitano, who is the 20th president of the University of California, where she leads a university system with 10 campuses, 5 medical centers, 3 affiliated national laboratories, and a statewide agricultural natural resources program. So that's a lot.
It's a lot.
We have had her here before at CSIS, but under a slightly different set of topics. She has served as the Secretary of Homeland Security from 2009 to 2013, as the Governor of Arizona between 2003 and 2009, and the Attorney General of Arizona as well. So thank you very much for coming back to CSIS.
Thank you.
Great. And then next to her is the Honorable Dr. Kristina M, who is the State University of New York's 13th Chancellor. With 64 colleges and university campuses located within 30 miles of every home, school, and business in the state, which I didn't know, and I just thought that was really cool, by the way. SUNY is the nation's largest comprehensive system of public higher education. Immediately before going to SUNY, Dr. Johnson was a co-founder of something called the CEO of Cube Hydro Partners, which is a clean energy infrastructure company focused in North America. And prior to that, Dr. Johnson served as the Undersecretary of Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy, where she actually gave a talk at CSIS at the old building, so in a much not as nice room as this, about how to move technologies through commercialization. And I was just telling Dr. Johnson before we came out here that we had the other Undersecretary for this administration, Paul DeBar, here last week. So really glad to sort of keep the theme going. And then last but not least, a guy who helped make all of this possible, Dr. Tim Carter, is the president of a group called Second Nature, which is a nonprofit with a mission to proactively build a sustainable and positive global future through bold commitments in higher education. And before holding that position, he was the founding director of Butler University's Center for Urban Ecology. So everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Great. So you've launched this initiative in February of this year. Maybe starting with you, President Napolitano, could you talk a little bit about how this came about and what is the core mission of UC3?
So, research universities in the United States are unique and uniquely influential institutions. It's where the bulk of our nation's basic research is done. It's where a lot of applied research is done. And we're also educating the next generation. And so when I became president of the University of California, we adopted the goal that as an institution with those 10 campuses and 5 academic medical centers, i.e. large hospitals, et cetera, that we would become carbon neutral by the year 2025. And so we have been embarked as a UC in a variety of activities towards that goal. But we recognize that there were other research universities and that research universities could contribute not only within the confines, the physical confines of the university, but also working with the localities in which the campuses exist, and really push the research we were doing and the applied research we were accomplishing into public-private partnerships, into work with our surrounding cities and localities, and also exchange information between ourselves about how best to educate the next generation and achieve not only the knowledge base, but the changes in behavior that are going to be necessary for a healthy climate future. And so UC3 unites 13 of the leading research universities from Canada in the north to Mexico City in the south, California in the west to SUNY in the east, and parts in between, who are working together to foster the kind of intersegmental application of the kind of research and knowledge base that we are going to need for our climate.
No, and so I want to add, get into more of what you guys are doing specifically in the California system. But Dr. Johnson, can you talk a little bit about what you all are doing at SUNY that are examples of the kind of activities that you're trying to amplify through this cooperative arrangement?
Sure, absolutely. I will make a comment about how I got to join this merry band.
Yeah, please,
I
go
think
ahead.
that Tim and Janet are two people I admired from my previous lives, and still do, of course. But when I ran Cube Hydro Partners, we were looking to figure out how to bring more clean energy onto the grid, and that's how Tim and I met. And then when I became the next chancellor before I started, I had the chance to go out to California and ask some advice from President Napolitano. And we had worked together in the administration. So I was pretty excited about trying to use the fact that we have a system and we can pilot solutions at campuses and then scale them across the whole system. And of course, President Napolitano and Dr. Carter are already thinking about those networks and how we could actually accomplish that together. So it seemed to be a natural alliance. We've set 3 or 4 goals, I would say, probably 2 major initiatives. One is to source renewable energy. 100% of our energy will be renewable. And we're looking to get that RFP out on the street and to try and accomplish that sometime in 2020. And I have to hedge a little bit on the time just because of the time it takes to procure electricity and all that. But I think that that's pretty straightforward. And with energy prices so low, really encourage everybody in the network, of course, and across the country to think about doing that, because we can use university buying power to buy clean power. And that's what I think we're all in a line to do. I think the second piece is immediately all new buildings will be designed and constructed to zero net energy. So you think about that, SUNY in the state of New York owns and operates 40% of the state's building stock. So it's 2,348 buildings.
Who's counting?
But it's counting, right? And growing all the time, right? So what we're looking for across the 64 campuses with all these buildings, and that's just the state operated. That's not the community colleges, which is also part of SUNY. And therein, I think, lies the opportunity, is to use those as living laboratories. So as we retrofit those, and they're all on average 50 years old, so they have critical maintenance, that's the most cost-effective time to go in and retrofit them and to use the students and use the applied learning opportunity with our faculty members to not only retrofit those, which is what Tim talked about, the place-based part of this, but cross sectors to ripple that out into the businesses and local governments. And that's really what our goal is. So 100% renewable energy to be our electricity source as soon as possible, and then all new buildings designed to zero net energy. And this is the time, 20, 30 years ago, you pay a premium about 25% to build a zero net carbon. I shouldn't say, we all want energy, but zero net carbon building. But today it's plus or minus 4%. The payback is very short. So it's really a matter of being able to get the upfront because you know you're going to get paid back. And fortunately, President Napolitano and I live in states where the governors are very progressive. And so Governor Cuomo's established, I think, one of the largest, if not the largest, green bank in the country, about $1.6 billion that's funding 26 projects right now to get after this. So we're very fortunate that our agenda aligns very nicely with the counties and with the businesses. So I think this is the time.
President Napolitano, do you have additional activities that you are doing, or are they pretty much aligned with what Dr. Johnson was saying?
Very much aligned. So in terms of renewable energy, by way of example, we made the largest purchase of 2 solar farms of any university in the country. They will generate 80 megawatts, about 15% of our usage of energy. Each of our campuses now has on-site solar facilities that combined are already contributing 40 megawatts, and in progress are another 30. That conversion to using renewable sources of energy is very active at the University of California. And then, we're engaged in terms of cross-segment. When we say cross-segmental, what are we talking about? We're talking about how to cross the bridge between university campuses and, say, their surrounding cities, or with the private sector. How do you make that work and translate the applied research underway at the universities to actual implementation in other segments? And so, for example, at UCLA, we are, with the city of Los Angeles, embarked on a grand challenge, which has 3 components to it. But one of the components is that the entire city of Los Angeles be essentially carbon neutral by 2050. And we, of course, want to exceed that deadline and do it faster. But the campus is working very actively with the city of Los Angeles. And these are the kinds of things that we can do in terms of sourcing our own energy, but also crossing that intersegmental bridge.
Okay, this is great. So just to maybe bring Tim into the conversation, Dr. Carter, so Second Nature is the group that you lead. You also have something called the Climate Leadership Network that is a much broader group of universities. Can you talk a little bit about what you do, but then specifically how this organization amplifies or adds another layer of depth to the work that you guys have already been engaged in?
Yeah, thanks. And it's a privilege and an honor to be up here with such great leadership. So we're not an organization of higher education, but what we do is connect higher ed together. For the past decade, we've run the Climate Leadership Network, which you mentioned. So this is now it's 600 institutions that all have a commitment to carbon neutrality or resilience, and they've had that for nearly a decade at this point. So this is one of the boldest, if not the boldest, voluntary carbon emission reductions programs in any sector in the world. And we've been able to scale that through the network activity that we do. So as a network organization, we think about it as in kind of 3 ways. One is to connect as a connecting network. The second is to align, so to get people focused on the same topic. And then the third is to produce. And that is to do things together that you couldn't do on your own. And it's really challenging for institutions, even systems, large systems. You talked about taking SUNY across all the schools within SUNY and doing something together collectively on aggregated renewable energy. It's very difficult for you to work outside of SUNY, to connect with the UCs of the world, independent of individual faculty connections that you might have. But as an institution, it's very difficult for institutions to do that together. And that's what we as Second Nature have done in the Climate Leadership Network. And so whenever the UC3 as a concept was starting to emerge and discuss, we were advising President Napolitano on their next steps and how best to do that. And it becomes pretty clear pretty quickly that you need a network organization to help with that. And that's our role for the UC3 specifically. And we provide capacity and infrastructure to do that.
Well, and you both run such massive networks that are complicated in and of themselves. I can imagine networking outside of them is not a small task. So you guys have been meeting. UC3 leadership, which is the 13 university systems have been meeting to talk about what you'd like to do together in advance of the summit in California in September. How have those conversations been going, and what kind of issues are you discussing? Has it been guiding the sort of vision for where you guys plan to go?
Well, there have been meetings underway aiming for the September conference summit. I always object to using the word summit because, it implies that you've reached the top and you've finished, accomplishing what you need to accomplish. When in point of fact, we know that this will need to be ongoing work with consistency and persistency, that we're going to have to be willing to invest appropriately, that we have to be thinking in terms of infrastructure, not just what we're building or retrofitting now, but what's coming up in the next 5 or 10, 15 years. So I think summit is not the right word, but I'll use it because
People use
they're
that,
using
right?
it.
How about
So
Valley?
everybody's using
Are you
it.
going to have a Valley? Well,
Valley, right?
But one of the things that we want to make sure becomes clear at the summit is the role that research universities play and how the attendees at the summit can interact with research universities to take full advantage of them. And at the summit to make very clear what UC3 is doing and what more we are pledging as systems to do. So I think those conversations are underway, and I'm looking forward to September.
Right. Tim, did you want to
Yeah,
say
and just to be clear, so it hasn't just been the presidents and the chancellors discussing what are we going to do for the summit. There actually have been forums that have existed over the past number of months. And at those forums, the intent was really to establish a baseline. How aligned are the priorities of these research institutions with their local constituencies, their local governments, the business leaders that are there? How divergent are they? And in that gap, could research help fill some of those solutions in a very short-term way that can drive progress faster? I think the sense of urgency here we were discussing earlier can often be lost in pure research, and this challenge is just too urgent for us to kind of take the normal path, and that's where the reorientation and the activity that's already happened has started to get this established this baseline.
So I'll give you maybe an example. So we all pledged, part of the 13 with the leadership here, that we would hold one of these cross-sector conferences. So it's government, industry, university researchers. Stony Brook University took the lead, one of our 64 campuses, and this was the 10th time they held one of these cross-sector meetings. There were over, I think, 200 different entities that attended, and one of the opportunities there was that we worked with the New York Power Authority to come up with a strategic plan in order to accomplish sourcing 100% of our electricity from SUNY from clean energy sources, and that's somewhere around 1 million to 1.6 million megawatt hours. So it's not an insignificant amount, and it's trying to figure out how we source it. And I think what President Napolitano was talking about is we have the opportunity to do, in an information technology sense, on-prem. So computing has gone from on-prem to the cloud. When you do on-prem or on-premise for the universities, you save so much money because you're not paying for distribution, transmission, gross receipts tax. You're actually sourcing and using at site. At the same time, if you want to have storage or you want to have central, everything's going to distributed. It still helps for resiliency to have that backup be centralized. So how you work distributed as on-prem and in the cloud, if you will, which is the grid, is I think one of those important research topics that we're trying to get at with NYPA and SUNY in order to accomplish this massive energy purchase.
So we've both talked about, and I think everybody has mentioned, one of the values of the organization is to try and compare experiences working with local communities, and certainly renewable energy purchasing is one of those ways in which universities can do that. Are there other ways in which different members of UC13 have worked with the communities around them to solve certain climate problems? I remember in some other work that we've done, local communities really trying to get their hands around, things to do about modeling adaptation or just other, portions of that climate dimension. Are there other things that either your universities or other universities within the 13 are looking at?
It's been interesting to hear some of the feedback. So one of our roles is to actually synthesize some of that that's happening. So, SUNY and UC, they hold the fora, but they submit what has come out of that to us. And one of the interesting pieces has been finance. Like, how do we pay for this stuff? And the important role that by synergizing efforts, you could actually come up with some really creative financing solutions. So it's not just renewable energy itself, but how do you pay for building retrofits? How do you understand the way in which energy use and cost associated with that's then saved can be poured back into a similar funding program? And then how can that be shared cross-jurisdictionally, even internationally? These are Canadian schools as well as Mexican schools. So what lessons can be learned across the borders too? And so we're starting to see different themes. Not just, it's not just energy systems. There's a lot of data, like the big data started to come up a lot in a number of these forums.
Absolutely.
Like how can you use data more effectively, inform your decisions?
And that's probably what are some of the lessons learned or challenges you all have faced in trying to think about working with local communities? I mean, financing is a really good one, right? Where you can have the best plans in the world, but if you're not entirely sure how you connect that to access to financing, that's difficult. Are there other challenges that you guys have faced in trying to translate the good work that you're doing in research into the local communities where you're working?
I think one of the challenges is the challenge of scalability, that there can be a tactic that is used, on a local premise, but how do you expand that to cover, say, an entire city or a state even? And so we keep raising in the group and with our researchers, et cetera, that question of scalability. How can we do it? How can we do it quicker? How can we do it cheaper? So, it's a challenge.
And you'd mentioned the digitalization sort of question. I mean, is that something, you're from New York and California, right? So places that have really thought about some of these questions. So I can certainly imagine a digitalization conversation within the context of what's going on in New York would be something that is not new to everybody. But I can imagine to some of the other members, it's something that's relatively new to the communities in which they're working. I mean, how has that gone for you?
I think in some ways, when we think about digitization, you actually can think about this as a system, as President Napolitano said. So you have all these inputs, right? So you have the inputs, you have solar, you have wind, you have storage, you might have natural gas as a backup. So if you think about what do you want as the output, you want to have energy anytime, any place, be delivered and be exactly on when you flip that switch. So when you model that, you can actually use analytics to make sure that these power plants are producing at this particular time, connected in with what the weather prediction is at that particular time. So you can tell if a cloud's going to come overhead or the wind. So you can actually tell what plant you should source from and where it needs to go to. Those kinds of dynamics, and that's really what NYPA does, but it's also what our data scientists do. So we have a working relationship where we bring them on site and do that research together with the data analytics. I think the other challenges we see is really something we learned deploying the Recovery Act. So we had $36 billion when I was Undersecretary of Energy to get out for all kinds of renewable energy weatherization. We had $5 billion for weatherization. Our goal was to do 1 million homes. It took us almost 2 years. We accomplished that. And the average is about $5,000. That's the sweet spot of how much you deploy to weatherize a home to get about 33% reduction in energy use. When you think about what was the biggest problem when we went around to try and accomplish that, it was that the communities had such small workforces and they really needed help on logistics and planning and more business as well as economics and the psychology. How do you get into someone's home when you don't know them? I mean, there's all these other issues that have nothing to do with the science, and that's where I think about cross-sector is not just cross-sector with government, industry, and university, it's cross-disciplinary within the university. So I think that's the thing I'm most excited about with one campus within 30 miles of every person is can we deploy energy efficiency at scale? There's 7.5 million homes in the state of New York. There's 150 million homes in the US. So if it's going to take us 2 years to do 1 million, that won't cut it, because it'll take 150 years for us to get this done. Time's running out. I mean, I think you mentioned that, Tim. We only have so much time, and I think because we're trying to be progressive, we got to get it done even faster, because others aren't going to be that fast. So I feel definitely a sense of urgency, and I think that's where the analytics can help in terms of predicting. If you invest $1 here, this is your payback. If you invest $1 over here, you're not going to get that payback. And we need that sort of direction now, I think.
Just two follow-ups to what Chancellor Johnson was saying. That one is that the research institution is not just technological research. They're not just hard science researchers that are engaging. This is public policy. This is social science researchers. This is across the institution, and it's staff. It's people who have been at the university for years that aren't faculty, but actually know the climate action plan of the university and know the climate action plan of the city, maybe help develop the city's climate action plan. So this is like the whole ecosystem of the university and the orbit that it's a part of. I mean, that's the first part. The second part is you guys appreciate you being here and being on the coast, but Ohio State University, one of the UC3, Columbus, Ohio, they're helping them develop their first climate action plan. They're in the center of the state, in the Midwest. And if you lead with climate in some of these places, it can be really challenging. So the theme of the UC3 is to focus on the outcomes. Do we share outcomes together rather than necessarily the orthodoxy of climate? We have to lead with climate change. So Columbus, Ohio is going to work on how can we create this, intellectual infrastructure for the center of the state, and can that be a source of advancement for the whole region of Ohio as a whole, not just the city of Columbus. So there's all different dynamics that happen all over the country. I think that's a strength of UC3 as well. It's not just, they're all research universities, but they're not all located in the same place.
Could I follow up on something that both Janet and Tim said? 'Cause I think I want to connect the dots there. So you're talking about how you lead, right? You might lead with the economics and job creation. So it turns out, and you have to take it to scale. The biggest problem, I think, with climate change, we did a program when I was undersecretary called the Strategic Technology Energy Plan, or STEP, which was how would you break a really big problem like getting to 83% carbon emissions by 2050 down to what we have to do year by year. Okay, here's the punchline. It would take $1 trillion investment over the first 15 years before we'd start to see payback from this net, $1 trillion net. And you may say, wow, that's a lot of money. Which it is, but if you think about it, it's only $67 billion a year. China's investing $75 billion a year. The UK's been investing $70 billion a year since 2008. Furthermore, this country did that big project from 1955 to 1980. Those 25 years, we spent 0.43% of our gross domestic product building the US highway system in this country. If we were to spend just 0.3% of our gross domestic product now for the next 15 years, that would get you that $1 trillion investment. We'd have all electric vehicles. We'd have a completely green grid. We would have a renewable energy-based grid as well. And that's considering that the residual value of all that investment would be zero out in 2050. So how much is $1 trillion a year over 15 years? It is 2 Starbucks venti lattes a week per household. So if you live in a household where 2 people drink coffee, it's 1 cup of coffee for you and 1 cup of coffee for the other person per week. Or if you want to go to Dunkin' Donuts, it's 4 coffees a week, 2 each. This is not a lot of money, but it takes willpower, and it takes taking it to scale. And I think this is where what we're trying to do together is collectively get to scale.
So I think one of the other things is that given the retreat of the United States as a country from the Paris Accords, et cetera, we could all just sit back and say, oh, it's terrible, it's awful, blah, 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 blah. Or you could say, you know what, the United States is made up of a lot of ingredients. It's made up of cities, it's made up of states, it's made up of businesses, it's made up of universities, particularly research universities. How can those elements work together, prompted perhaps by work by our universities, to get our country to where we would have been if we had stayed in the Paris Accords?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a fair point. And I do think the context here is really important. And there are other sectors that are also interested in aggressive climate action at a subnational level, and having universities play their complementary role with those groups. So we're not all acting in the same way, but we're acting complementary way is really going to help us meet these targets that have been set, and actually, really accelerate past those targets that maybe were in the nation's climate action plan, for example, or under the Paris Agreement.
And what Tim said with alignment, I think, is really critical. So again, fortunately, we have a number of governors that have come together, and now their university systems have come together to say, okay, in the case of New York State and equally aggressive in California, Governor Cuomo, through Executive Order 88 and Executive Order 166, has said we want to achieve 50% renewable. We will source 50% of our energy will come from renewable, not hydro, by 2050. Now, 25% of the electricity in the state of New York is hydro. So that is going to be a very aggressive goal. But if we get behind that, and we can take to scale across all of our entities, whether it's in the UC system or in SUNY system and across your whole network, then we can learn from each other what works best and how did we get that alignment between the industry, the county, the cities, and the government. So I think it's a pretty exciting time. I actually am very heartened that we can do this, we will do this.
So one of the things I'm curious about is, I agree with everything that you've said, and I think it is a really important initiative at a really important time. It brings large institutions that have deep expertise on a whole range of issues and all of the different ways of tackling and addressing climate issues to a local level, right? And to sort of help bring those resources to bear. The thing I'm curious about is, have you opened, as you said about Ohio, not everybody is sort of open to this message and open to this challenge. I mean, you break it down to the coffee, I get it. I mean, that seems eminently doable. I've probably spent that much money myself at Starbucks.
Today, right?
No, today, right, absolutely. What new areas or opportunities do you think you're opening within this research agenda to, maybe component pieces of your university system that weren't doing this? I mean, you hear all the time, they say, well, sure, there's a green agenda at the university, but it's not the driving mission of the university. It's that fringe thing that's happening over there sort of thing. I mean, has that changed over the period and time in which you guys have been doing this job? I mean, has it moved to a more central position within the way you think about the future of the university's mission and the system's mission?
I think it has. I think for us, there was a lot of this kind of work underway before I became president in 2013. By establishing a very clear university-wide goal, we will be carbon neutral by 2025. That goal is a very aggressive goal, but having that goal, all of a sudden, it begins to get the work to align underneath it. People are mobilized and they're excited about the goal. We have the Cool Campus Climate Challenge, where we have competitions within the campuses and between the campuses that's designed for energy efficiency. And so you begin at that level, and then you work at bringing different faculties together, and you work with convenings with localities, intersegmental, and between institutions. So, for example, this spring, UC at Caltech, which is another member of the UC3, hosted a meeting in Southern California, which included the State Air Resources Board. It included mayors and city representatives. It included some of the other higher education institutions in California, like USC and Stanford, to discuss, to exchange ideas, to think through what next steps need to be. And so, by establishing some clear targets, you can really you can sense that feeling of mobilization and that, yeah, we can do this. And as Dr. Johnson said, as we will, right?
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. You know, I've only been in this job 9 months, so it's absolutely been at the center of my agenda for the whole time I've been here. But before that, the SUNY system was very active. So Stanley Whittingham, who's one of the inventors or co-inventors of the lithium-ion battery, was at University of Buffalo, working with, Binghamton University, sorry Satish and Harvey, working with the Advanced Energy Research and Technology Center at Stony Brook to try and deploy those around sustainable grids. So this work's been going on. Bob Halen, who runs our construction fund, it's a $4 billion a year annual budget around these 2,348 buildings. He's totally on board. He's running faster. I have to keep up with him. So I think there has been quite a lot of work, and I just happen to be coming in at a great time.
That's great. That's great.
But I do think you asked what's different now, because these are things that have been happening.
Right.
And I think what's different now is this alignment between a massive social challenge and the mission of the universities, which in some ways is to serve massive social challenges. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that it always is the case that research serves massive social challenges, but we have one. Sometimes it happens, but in this particular case, could there be the sense of urgency around this such that when you reorient your thinking around the role that you as especially a public research institution, you get
special responsibility.
Yeah, you have special social responsibilities
Right,
that,
exactly.
you've got, not everyone, there's massive endowment money that is not, that is exempt. We say you can use, we don't take the money away from you in the same way because you're serving a social good as a university. Mm-hmm. And so there's an obligation there. I think there's not just an obligation to educate, but there's also an obligation to take on some of these social challenges. I think the way the UC3 leadership has thought about it has been to align at its core with its mission, which is tackle social challenges and address them in the way that they're best suited to do. And that's I think, maybe a little bit of the application in a different way than what we had maybe thought about it in the past.
Yeah, I think that's right.
One of the things that we've picked up on here in a lot of the programming that we're doing is at the local level, particularly in the United States, people at almost all levels are very aware of the opportunity associated with energy development, right? And whether it's clean energy technologies or cleaner applications for more conventional or fossil-based energy technologies, there's a lot of recognition that there is economic opportunity. I think you mentioned it a little bit earlier that sometimes for maybe some of the not coastal universities that you're working with, there need to be some alternative justification for those programming as well. But it does seem to me that's one place where university systems are uniquely positioned to hit sort of a spectrum of education, all the way from sort of, the theory about how these things work, and research in laboratories, all the way to community college applications and connecting this with jobs and things like that. Is that something that's come up a lot when you're working with cities or local community groups?
So SUNY is unique in that we have 30 community colleges, we have 28 comprehensive, which would be 4 years in masters, and then we have 7 doctoral, 5 medical schools, and 3 hospitals. Not as many, but still they're big. And they use a lot of energy.
They use a lot of energy.
And so with the community colleges, we have been funded from the governor's office to develop workforce initiatives around clean energy. So like Morrisville State, we have microhydro, we have solar, wind, and the students actually go out and deploy and learn how to do this. And it's not at scale, but they learn how to do it so they can even start companies, which they've done. And so we've had, again, at our sort of tech sector schools, that is the focus there, all the way to the research such as, and I have to say correctly now, Stanley Whittingham's work at Binghamton University. So that's, I think, one of the exciting bits. And also community colleges are funded. The formula is a third from the county, a third from the state, and a third from the tuition. So there is, to your point, a real social responsibility to provide for the county good, which means spinning off companies, creating jobs locally. And upstate and downstate, it's more of a challenge because our population is increasing in New York City, but decreasing a bit in the upstate. So that's a real another part of our mission is creating those clean energy jobs.
President Chancellor?
Yeah, so I agree, and we're having those kinds of conversations and undertaking those kinds of activities. I think, one of the things that we recognize is that if we're truly going to attain some of these larger goals, it's not just a matter of technology, it's a matter of behavioral change.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think we're just beginning to understand
I agree.
the intersection
Yeah.
between the technology and how individuals act and
Sure.
how they approach their energy usage and,
Right.
and the like. And I think that will be a future avenue of exploration for us.
Well, we've been hearing a lot about this campus as a living lab idea. A lot of campuses now talk that way. What this provides, what a framework like UC3 provides, is a way to put that into action on the climate solution side. And so you could say, not only are we testing the technology in the lab, but we're actually using the campus as a test site for the early stage company that has actually spun out of the research that we did. And by the way, we're kind of like a mini city anyway, and so next step is let's deploy it, across Albany or across Sacramento or across Columbus.
So I just had a thought, actually stimulated by Dr. Napolitano, what you said, that you were doing it with that cool energy challenge.
Campus challenge.
Cool campus challenge. So what if we do that across all the network, or across the country, and then we get the systems, we put up some money, you put up some money, and then we find out the best and the brightest and connect all the people working across the whole country. So one of the things I want, if I could just throw out what I want someone to design, would that be all right?
Yeah.
So, okay.
If only you had a network organization.
I only had a network organization that could do that, right? So I'm going to throw out a question to the audience, if I could. How much do you think it would cost to mitigate your carbon footprint from a ride-sharing, ride? I don't want to mention a particular, company like Uber or Lyft, but something that's ride-sharing. How much would it cost on the average ride that you would take if you'd have to pay to mitigate your carbon footprint? Anybody? 50 cents. Someone said 50 cents. Good. Any other? More than 50%?
It's going to depend on your area. If you're a rural area, you're going to be going a lot further. So it's not, if you're in a city, it's a lot easier, but those technologies aren't too.
So easier in a city, more expensive.
Yeah, you're right. You'll be going further in rural. But if we just say on average,
Yeah.
50 cents. Now, how many of us would pay 50 cents to mitigate our carbon footprint for a ride? Okay, I'm speaking to the choir, I realize. How many think that's too much? Well, it turns out if you do the math, it's about a nickel. Because the average ride is, I can give you my assumptions. It's always important to ask for people's assumptions. I'll tell you.
What are your assumptions?
Thank you. I thought you'd never ask. I think it's like 5 miles is the average Uber ride-sharing distance. So it's about a nickel. And I also assume that 1 mile is about a pound of CO2. I assume 30 some miles to the gallon. I mean, those are kind of the level we'll go down to. Now, so I thought, okay, all we need to do is write an app to the platform that comes on, a little query, would you like to mitigate your carbon footprint? And oh, by the way, it's a dime. There's got to be some cost of doing business. And then if you look at the billions of rides that go on, you'd be raising hundreds of millions of dollars a year. And so how would you mitigate the carbon footprint? Well, what you would do is you would use that money to go invest and build renewable energy, whether it's wind farms or solar farms or upgrade hydro or storage or carbon capture and sequestration, nuclear power, whatever you want that's zero carbon. So I thought I was the only one who'd ever thought of this. Alas, not true. Of course, always Google something before you go out with this,
Yes.
which I did. So it turns out there was a student at MIT who did this a few years ago. You can Google this, it's on there. And he set up this app, but it wasn't that successful financially. And the reason why is because, people didn't do it, right? Now, I don't know what he charged and all that, but it wasn't that much. So that's where I think what Tim was saying brings in the behavioral change and also what Dr. Napolitano said with behavioral change. It turns out if you then create another opportunity for that person who's giving that dime or that nickel or that quarter back to benefit, a micro raffle. They've actually shown that you get 50% conversion within 3 or 4 months to change your behavior to do peak shaving in transportation or healthcare. You walk more with Fitbits. There's a professor at Stanford, Dr. Balaji Prabhakar. And he's shown by giving meaningful rewards, often you can actually get people to change their behavior. So what we now have to do is couple that app with then everybody every so often gets a free ride. Everybody would click, right? Because now it's a game, which we all like to play
Now
games.
it's like a frequent flyer thing.
Exactly. That's exactly right.
That's right.
So we need somebody to do that. I think we could then generate a ton of money to invest in renewable energy.
Tim, sounds like a great program.
I was just going to say, Tim got a homework assignment.
Plenty of staff in the room that can help with that.
All right, great. I'll put you in touch.
Well, listen, I want to open up to the audience to answer questions in a minute, but one thing that we've left out of the discussion so far is this is not just a U.S. Activity, right? You've got partners in Canada and Mexico. Is this yielding cross-border projects, or what is the nature of that of the involvement of the universities in Mexico? And
So, yes, it is yielding some cross-border projects. I'll mention just one where the Ministry of Energy in Mexico is funding an energy efficiency grant program. But a condition of the grant is that the grantee must be doing work in conjunction with the University of California.
Oh, okay.
They are now 60% of the grant funds are out. They're in the field and they are working on energy efficiency projects together. So that's just one example of what's happening.
No, that's great.
And was there a North American vision to this? Was it a sort of just a who was interested kind of thing?
I think there was
a desire to expand?
I think the vision is energy efficiency for the border zone.
I see.
So, and the border is not just a wall, or a line, but it's a whole zone with communities on both sides. And so I think it's designed specifically to promote energy efficiency.
For that, okay. And Tim, in the
Maybe
private
just one
partnership.
comment. So we've danced around the federal government's role in this, and this move last June when President Trump announced his intent to withdraw from the Paris Agreement was one of the responses, maybe just in the general public, was this: we are still in movement. We, as subnational actors, want to still be in. On these calls, we have Mexican and Canadian schools, and if that topic gets brought up, they say, "We never left. We've been in." And so their relationship with their federal governments, whatever form that takes, has been an interesting learning experience for the US-based institutions who really right now don't have that strong support from the federal government. And so as we continue to build this out and learn actions that are being taken, I think the federal level is an interesting place where the international cohort of higher ed institutions can really help inform the U.S. cohort, and vice versa as politics change or whatever the future looks like. It's going to be, that's a clear cross-border dynamic that they'll continue to learn from each other on.
And I think given where we're located in the Northeast and also in the Northwest, we obviously share a very long border with Canada. We also share a lot of hydropower. And one of the maybe disturbing things about the climate change and things heating up is a lot of the dams that were built are anchored into permafrost, which is starting to melt. And when you think about then what downstream, the homes that have been built, and there's 4 ratings in dam safety, and so high hazard dams aren't that they're necessarily a hazard from failing, but they're a hazard if they do fail for what's downstream. So I think that the hydropower has been an area that we've been looking at, also because we share the Great Lakes, and so it's really water quality issues as well.
Okay, one more question before I go to the audience. I just want to remind people watching online too, if you want to text a question, you can do it using the hashtag CSIS Live, and I'll get them up here. It's kind of come up in everything that we've been talking about, but climate change is as much a communication challenge as it is a large engineering and societal and behavioral sort of challenge. A lot of what you're doing and universities are doing is trying to communicate about this issue and the importance of this issue. And we've just noticed as one of the strategic issues that we're dealing with here at CSIS is another group that has a public education mandate, that doing that right now is really quite hard. There's a lot of skepticism about expertise. There's a lot of skepticism about disinformation on particularly divisive topics. Have you found that that there's more call for universities like yours to get out there and sort of feature opportunities to have discussions about those issues? And is it getting more divisive or less? Or what would your recommendation be to other university leadership out there that's thinking about doing this, about how to play that role effectively, particularly now?
So we're both lucky. We're in states that that are led by individuals who have a strong interest in this and are supportive of public policies involving climate change and support their public universities for our activities. Not every state is so situated, and this is something I've been thinking about, and which is to say that you can have what I view as this false debate about the science of the causation of climate change. It is a false debate based on the science, but it quickly gets you into kind of a political divide. But everybody sees the effects of the changes in weather, the changes in sea level rise, the changes in natural catastrophic events, which are predicted to be more frequent and more severe as we move forward. So talking about what individuals can do to adapt and prevent future deterioration of the atmosphere, and how we can be better prepared, be more, to use the word, resilient. That I think is a communication track that doesn't really split the same way. But in the meantime, we are educating the next generation. But between our two systems, we have well over 1 million students. So every cohort that comes through should be, exposed to the science and to what things they can do, and be offered the opportunity to participate in some of the research, et cetera, that underlies what needs to happen. And every time we graduate a cohort, they go out into their communities. They have families they're talking with. They have friends. They have colleagues at work, et cetera. So, I think that is a major asset that we can contribute.
That's great. Chancellor Johnson?
I think I would agree with what you said, Dr. Napolitano. I also think that it's our responsibility to teach our students how to interpret data, how to display data, how to talk about it. And so that's something we have to be vigilant about, because at the end of the day, the theories may change what the data means. Algorithms may change that interpret the data, but the data has to have integrity. So I think that's something that we're emphasizing, and then really taking that education. The mission of the university is pass on culture to the next generation. I'd like to make sure there is a next generation, pass on that too. So that's why I'm really thrilled to be part of this network.
And universities, higher ed in general, is one of the most trusted institutions across all the sectors, and so I think they have a long history of convening discussions, and they'll continue to do that. I think that, to me, is a communications issue as well, is how do you get people to actually dialogue and almost restore a functional democracy. That's a very deep and hard challenge, but one that universities could actually take up to.
Absolutely. Okay, we're going to open it up to the floor for questions. I just ask if you please state your name and affiliation, question in the form of a question, and wait for the microphone. We'll get you in. So, any questions? Yes, ma'am. We'll start right here. Nope, I think Crystal.
Oh, thank you. Hi, my name is Emery Kiefer. I'm with the Climate Reality Project, which is founded by former Vice President Gore, and we work on climate education and working on solutions. And I just first want to thank all of you for the precedent that you're setting and the roadmap that you're starting for universities, and I think it's playing a critical role in transitioning us to a green energy economy. But I'm curious to know, how does the role of grassroots student organizations influence university systems decisions on climate initiatives? And then as a follow-up, what do you think is the most valuable input that students can provide to the framework of the Youth C3 system, and especially for students who are more interested in macro change versus behavioral?
Those are great questions.
I know, they are.
So we have a very active student body, and they're kind of known for that. We have students working in our energy office. They are contributing on a daily basis to what we're doing. We have student groups that are all participating. I talked about the Cool Campus Challenge that help facilitate that. I think that is part of our educational role, is to involve students and to reach out. And students are concerned. I mean, the students I meet, they are maybe not so much interested in domestic partisan politics as they are interested in addressing some of the world's great challenges.
Yep.
And they view this as it is, one of the world's great challenges. And so, you can kind of meet the students where they are.
Yeah.
Chancellor.
Well, I would agree. We have a very strong shared governance within the State University of New York, and so the Student Assembly at SUNY is also very active, which is great. In fact, our presidents from all the campuses and the Student Assembly writ large meets with the UC System Assembly here in DC. I think they're meeting this month. So that's sort of one point. And I think, too, we recognize as educators that the reason we are here is to educate the next generation, which is the students. So if students are active on campus and they go to the administration, they want to see change, that makes a huge impact. Mm-hmm. So I would really recommend all students that are passionate about this to go talk to the administration, talk to their faculty, and figure out how to get involved. Our partnership with NYSERDA puts an energy manager in a region around all of our 64 campuses, and we have interns, just like Dr. Napolitano mentioned, working to act, through applied learning opportunities. So that's what gives me hope. It really does.
Tim, did you have any thoughts on this? You don't have any students to deal with, I suppose, but
To deal with, yeah. Well, students matter. I mean, we have, across our network, all the presidents say if there is a customer, students are the customer, mm-hmm. and you listen to your customer. And all the presidents will say that across the board. If students care about something passionately and they want to see it happen, as you just heard, they're going to pay attention. And so that's the call. Make them pay attention.
To tread a very thin line here, so I can imagine that they're a pretty good feedback mechanism, right? Mm-hmm. So like if you have a climate policy or a plan or an initiative that doesn't pass muster, right? I mean, I would imagine that you would get some feedback from that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No, and we do, and it's and so that ongoing exchange, very healthy for both groups.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. We had another question right there.
Hi, my name is Sandhya. I'm with Sol Systems. We're a commercial scale solar energy company. And so, of course, thank you again for your insights. It was great to hear about your roles as research universities. I'm interested in hearing about how you balance the need for long-term planning as universities with the urgency of climate change and the step-downs in incentives for most of these programs.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I'm glad you mentioned that, and Tim, you mentioned a little bit of the importance of, I don't want to underestimate the importance of the federal role in this, even though I think states and cities are acting, it helps with federal. So in 2010, we had about 2,500 megawatts of solar. Today we have 52,000 megawatts of solar deployed. That factor of 20 was because we had very good policy. It's the 1603 cashback grants, the tax, right? So, we need good policy. Wind, we had about 40,000 megawatts of wind. Today we have 82,000. It doubled. Why didn't it go up by a factor of 10? It didn't have consistent policy. It was here, it was there, it was here, it was there. So I think that we need that federal policy. We need that particular consistency in order to move forward. So that was the kind of comment when you said sort of the drop down. I think moving forward, we have to find ways to get back that consistency in order to push forward. So I just wanted to comment more on the second part of your question than the first, but I'll turn it over to the first for.
I think that's a really good insight and a valuable one to keep in mind. As administrators of these institutions, so you have kind of your near-term construction needs, and then your long-term ones.
Yeah.
And the long-term ones are easier in a way because you're already building in energy efficiency. You're building in net neutrality. That is actually incorporated. It's the retrofitting that is very difficult, and we have been working with our campuses on different ways to finance retrofitting, and we're willing to invest appropriately in retrofits so that we can meet our carbon net neutrality goal.
Yeah.
Additional questions? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you. Helen Santiago Fink. I'm a climate urbanist and a researcher. So universities are laboratories. They're also opportunities to multiply, to be multipliers of issues related to carbon. With the leadership that you have now among these formidable universities, the opportunity to take from energy to move on to transportation, to move on to waste, zero waste, multimodal transportation networks. Changing behavior in part is looking at changing the context or shaping the context, that it's a low carbon context. The choice architecture, as Richard Fowler likes to say. Dr. Johnson, your idea of an offset type of thing, what is needed is also new financial models. Or is it on your agenda in terms of considering these creative financial modeling within the university context, whether it's a 0.1% on the tuition to lead into your climate initiative or any other types of creative modeling to be able to support your climate agenda?
So one of the things that, and this goes to the question about students actually, that the students at the university have done on a campus by campus basis is they have voted on increases to student fees, with the increases going toward our carbon goals. And so that's money we collect and we put it right back in. So that is underway, and exploring other ideas as well.
Yeah.
But
Well, I think you brought up a great, actually great question, right? So one of the things I mentioned, the governor's green bank, so $1.6 billion, in order to put those funds up and then wait to get the payback. If that kind of green bank system works very well. So I'll give you a specific example. Stony Brook University invested about $5.7 million in some energy efficiency projects, and the payback was about $860,000 a year. So if you divide the 5.7 by the 863,000, it'll take about 7 years to pay back. Well, that's a double-digit return on the money. We'd all like to put our money in something where we got double-digit returns, 10%, 11%, 12%. It also, reduced the carbon footprint by $4,000 and 4,000 tons, and educated a group of students, faculty, and staff around how we do that. So, can we do that system? We can do that at the system. We could take advantage of the green bank through our various partnerships, and that's in the next. That's sort of on my to-do list for the summer, is to build up how we're going to be able to scale that one pilot across the whole system. So that's what we'll need to do.
We're starting to see increasing a number of carbon pricing programs across different schools across the country, whether it's shadow pricing or internal, kind of cap and trade internal models. So that's starting to emerge. I think the other thing is the long-term life expectancy of the university is kind of a forever institution. And so most financial forecasts, you'll do 5, 10. These institutions are going to be there for way past the Fortune 500 companies will be in existence. And so why aren't we thinking about longer term life cycle analysis when we do the financial models?
Yeah.
And some schools are starting to do that as well.
Great. Good. Another.
exactly
Yep.
right.
Yes, sir.
Hello, my name is Liam Brody. I'm with the University of Colorado Office of Government Relations. So thank you all for being here and talking to us. It's been very interesting. My question for you is, so research and development is a huge piece of the puzzle for sustainable energy. And that's a lot of what universities do. However, another piece of that puzzle is lifestyle choices, the choices that people make in their everyday, day-to-day, whether that be zero waste, remembering to turn off the lights, or turning off the sink, things we've all heard. So universities are a big place for breeding behavior, and a lot of people continue their lifestyle habits while they're in university, while they're becoming young adults. So CG3 is a coalition of universities that are trying to make a sustainable future. And I was wondering if you guys have taken a look at this piece of the puzzle, the lifestyle behavior changes. I know at the University of Colorado, you guys were talking about partnering with local governments. We partner with the city of Boulder for this program called SCORE, which funds us, the Environmental Center, to go in and change light bulbs to LEDs and change shower heads to low-flow shower heads, things like that. So is there a focus on that in CG3? And do you think you guys could maybe communicate between each other for programs like these to help?
So the inventor of the LED light bulb is a faculty member at UC Santa Barbara. I just thought Professor Nakamura. So I had to put in that plug.
I will say, with all due respect, the blue LED.
The blue LED, yeah, exactly.
To
There's no
be clear.
competition
I'll take
between
that as a
schools.
friendly amendment. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about the need to branch out into behavioral change, right? Our campuses, are working toward zero waste, and I mean, that's another logical extension. Energy efficiency, I mentioned the Cool Campus Challenge, but there are clearly things that we haven't yet come up with or contemplated that we need to be thinking about. And our universities are homes to lots of good thinkers. So I actually think that one of the activities that UC3 should be branching into is kind of how you deal with this behavioral aspect, which is not only a technological kind of science aspect, but very much a social science aspect. We haven't really begun digging deeply into that, but we ought to.
I'd like to give a shout out to the University of Colorado. I did teach there for 14 years in Boulder, and they did something phenomenal about, 5-6 years ago? You actually voted to raise taxes. 77% of the voters voted to raise taxes, so because the city wanted to be more than 30% source more than 30% of their electricity from renewables, and the incumbent electrical company that was deploying it didn't want to do 30%, and so the city voted to raise taxes to pay for their basic franchise fees, their distribution costs, so that they could go and source it. Never seen that happen anywhere else. I think that, and that's the power of that town-gown relationship that Boulder has really developed. So shout out to you. And I think isn't CU Boulder?
CU Boulder is a
you're
member
part
of
the
UC3,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you know. But they're a great example in Boulder as a city, as part of the Carbon Neutral Cities Alliance, and they, as a campus, are perfectly aligned to, lead the way. So maybe you could lead the behavioral charge for them.
Yeah. It's awesome.
Great. Any final questions? Oh, yes, ma'am. No. The people on the webcast can't hear you, so thanks.
Hello, my name is Madeline Flammick. I'm interning at the American Security Project this summer as a climate and energy security intern. I'm actually a rising senior at SUNY Geneseo this year, so as an international relations major and environmental science minor. So this is very much my interest, so thank you. My question is kind of as the future of UC3 continues, do you see this maybe impacting curriculum and maybe creating more majors such as maybe climate policy and more policy-oriented things? Thank you.
Great question.
Yeah, so under the principles of shared governance at the University of California, the curricula is the province of the faculty, but we have so many faculty involved in our efforts now that the number of new classes and new course offerings and new minors and majors is burgeoning. So the answer is yes.
Yeah. Just a shout out to SUNY. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Okay, one more. Oh, we've got two more. Let's go.
Thank you guys so much. My name is Tyler Clevenger. I work at WRI. Just kind of a follow-up question on the previous one. How have you been thinking about how curricula can be shaped in such a way that they can leverage more climate and energy specific data classes or courses or majors in such a way that students could intern at a municipality and conduct a greenhouse gas emissions inventory, for example?
You bet. Yeah.
And we're seeing that happen. I mean, so exactly what you described in some of these cities where the university is a part of it. Yep. Internships are easily accessible, but what we would anticipate is that as the cities or locations that are part of these UC3 institutions learn more about how best to shape those student experiences, then there might be new educational models that could emerge out of that, the next upcoming 6 months or so. So whether it's curricular directly or co-curricular through, a different type of internship program that's maybe matched with the city or has a post-grad year or something like that, like a year of service. There's all sorts of ways in which that model could be changed, like the student experience model.
Absolutely, and I think one of the interesting things that is happening across the higher education is the whole micro-credentialing. So really looking at giving digital badges onto a transcript so that you can actually click on that or point your laser pointer and you get a download of what were the real experiences that contributed to, say, understanding climate policy. I did this internship in the counties, I get applied learning credit for it. So I think we're all just looking at how do we build on the traditional curriculum to look at how do we give our students additional abilities to distinguish themselves and help them get to the career so that they can live the productive and rewarding life. So I made some notes from all your comments and I appreciate it.
Okay, we've got a question in the back.
Thank you. I'm a PhD student in Health and Rehab Sciences at Stony Brook University, and right now I'm interning with the Office of Federal Relations. I just have two follow-up questions in terms of the communication barrier of climate change. Have you, in this program, UC3, have you thought of introducing the aspect of health and how does it affect, how it impairs health and human life in USA? Just a way to try to reach to middle America and people that really don't believe in science and say, look, there's data out there that suggests it's impairing from asthma to cancer. And the second question is, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, he's right now designated as the United Nations climate change person. Has there any thought of collaborating with him or anything that can possibly help to make this program stronger? Thank you.
Yeah, I think we're just beginning some of these aspects of UC3. So a communications strategic kind of umbrella that brings in issues of health by way of example. It's like the behavioral issues I was discussing over here. These are areas that we want to explore and get into. And as for Mike Bloomberg, I think there were some initial discussions with Bloomberg. And so I think we're paddling along in the same stream.
Yeah. No, go ahead, Pete.
Well, Bloomberg's very supportive. You're familiar with America's Pledge, which is kind of a quantification of this subnational commitment to climate action. Obviously, universities play a role in that. And what Bloomberg wants to see is good things happening around climate for the country. And the extent to which universities and UC3 can be an example of how to do that cross-sectorally. It's like you're saying, paddling in the same direction. Yeah. And maybe being on the same boat together even at some point in the near future. I think we're going to see that more and more.
Two quick comments and shout out to Stony Brook. So a couple things. One is there is a researcher named Paul Epstein. Have you read his work? He was at the Global Health, the School of Global Health at Harvard. He wrote a great paper. He's since passed away, regrettably, about 2 years ago. But he wrote a paper that showed that the health effects they estimated to be about $600 billion a year additional costs, which mostly from fossil-based and mainly coal, due to particles in the atmosphere. If you look at that and you were to be able to apply that cost to our electricity bill, it would triple the cost of coal-based energy. So instead of being 10 cents all in, it'd be more like 30 cents, which would totally make renewables and non-carbon sources very cheap in comparison. So I think we're still at the early stages of being able to understand how to quantify that. And the Advanced Energy Conference, which Stony Brook, pulled together this year and has been heavily involved in lead for the last 10 years in New York City, involved 13 other public and private universities beyond the SUNY in New York City, and also was connected with the Bloomberg Initiative. So again, we're very fortunate in New York to have such great leaders.
Well, we've come to the end of our time. I just want to say thank you so much for coming.
Thank
And one of the things I think is really important about this issue is it really does take large institutions thinking about local implementation for a problem this big. And so I think the leadership that you all are showing through this initiative and your colleagues as well is really important. And we thank you very much for sharing it with us today. So please help me and thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the LED. It's just my feet.
You're absolutely